The ability to create precise selections is what separates good Photoshop work from great Photoshop work. Here are some tools to get you there.
Photoshop has two sets of tools that come in handy when making basic manual selections. Let's see how they work. We're going to open up an image. We'll go to our Chapter 4 folder and select the file titled Marquee. The very first tool we're going to work with is, well, you may have guessed, the Marquee tool. It's the very first tool in our Tools panel. If you do not see a rectangle here, I want you to click on this bottom right disclosure triangle and scroll up and select Rectangular Marquee tool. In my image on screen, you can see two guides. If you do not see guides on your screen, I want you to go up to the View menu, Show, and select Guides. The last thing I'm going to do is change the screen mode. I'm going to go up to the Mode switcher and select Full Screen Mode with Menu Bar. I could have also used our handy shortcut, the F key. Now, using the Rectangular Marquee tool could not be any easier. You simply click and drag and draw any type of rectangular shape that you want. If you want to constrain your shape to a square, you click, drag, but on the keyboard you hold down the Shift key. And no matter how big or small you make it, you're automatically constrained to a square shape. Note that the point at which I click and drag becomes the upper left-hand corner of my selection. But there's a way to make that the center point of the selection. I'm going to move my mouse directly over the intersection of these guides, and if I click and drag, you can see that intersection is the upper left-hand point. But if I hold down the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on the PC, that starting point now becomes the exact center of my selection. Let's take a look at the choices that we have up in the Options bar. The very first icon here on the left is the New icon. That's what we've been using, so if you have a selection that you've drawn and you draw a second selection, this option automatically wipes out the first selection. Moving here to the right, we have the Add selection. So I'm going to start with the first selection. Now, notice that my cursor has a plus sign at the bottom. Any selection that I draw now will be added to the first one, so we're not wiping out the first one automatically. If we go over here, our next choice is Subtract, and this one, our cursor has a minus sign at the bottom. If I drag anywhere over an existing selection, that area of overlap will be deselected. Finally, we have the Intersect option. Now this one gives an X at the bottom of our cursor. And watch what happens. If I click and drag, the only area of the selection that ultimately will remain is where these two intersect. So I've got a thin sliver over here on the left, and if I release the mouse, that is the only part of the selection. Let's go back to our default. Under the Style menu, we've been working in normal mode. But suppose you want to have a fixed ratio or specific proportion for your image. We can simply go to Fixed Ratio, and here I've set it to a 6:7 proportion. So if I drag, no matter what I do with the mouse, I'm always going to be constrained to a 6:7 ratio. Underneath this, we've got Fixed Size. Now this one is interesting. Right now it's set to 3 inches by 3 inches. And this time I don't have to click and drag. I've already told Photoshop the dimensions of my selection, so all I have to do is click, and I have automatically a 3 by 3 inch square. Once we have a selection, we can move it. If I bring the mouse inside my selection area, notice that the cursor turns into a white arrow with a little rectangle around it. We can simply click and drag and move the selection anywhere we want to over the image. Once we've drawn a selection, what can we do with it? Well, if I move my mouse inside the selection and hold down the Control key on the PC, Command key on the Mac, note how my cursor changes. I can now cut the selection out of the image. So if I click and drag, I've now cut this out and made a hole in the image. I'm going to do Control Z on the PC, Command Z on the Mac to undo that. There's one last thing I want to show you. We'll go back up and set normal mode. I'm going to draw a shape. Now, up to this point, we've been drawing a shape around the areas that we want to select. That would be the inner contents of this shape. But if we go up to the Select menu, we can scroll down to Inverse, and we can invert the selection and select everything that we did not draw with that shape. So this time, with inverse selected, if I go inside my selection area, and on the Mac, if I press the Command key, Control key on the PC, and drag, I am now removing that inverted selection. Everything we've been doing with the rectangular marquee tool applies equally as well to the second tool that it is grouped with, and that is the elliptical marquee tool. The difference here is that you're starting with an elliptical shape. You can hold the Shift key to make a circle. Everything else is identical to what we've just been doing. The last two tools in here work a little bit differently. We have a single row marquee tool and a single column marquee tool. These allow us to click and make a selection of a single row or a single column of 1 pixel's width. Let's take a quick look at how that would work. I've selected the single row tool. I'm going to clear our existing selection. The keyboard shortcut is Command D on the Mac, Control D on the PC. And now with a single click, I have selected a row across the entire image that is exactly 1 pixel in height. If I go and select the single column tool, I can now click and select 1 column that is a single pixel width. Now we're going to move on to the lasso tool. To do that, we're going to close this document. I'm going to close it with Command W on the Mac, Control W on the PC, and we're not going to save this, so just hit Don't Save. We're going to go back to our Chapter 4 folder and open up the selection image. Before we get started with the lasso tool, I'm going to hit F to take us into full screen mode with menu bar, and I'm going to hit Command 0 on the Mac, Control 0 on the PC just to fit this image to screen. And the first lasso tool that we're going to use is the freeform drawing tool. It's just called lasso, and it's the first option in the lasso tool panel. This tool works by allowing us just to click and draw in a freeform manner. So I'm going to click, drag it around, and draw, and wherever I let go of the mouse, we're going to automatically have a completed shape moving from our first point to our last point. So there we've got this freeform shape, and again, if I move the mouse inside, I can move the shape. If I move the mouse inside and hold down the Command key on the Mac, Control key on the PC, I can cut this shape out of the image. Let's undo that with Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on the PC. Now the second tool here residing in the lasso tool panel is going to be a bit more useful. It's the polygonal lasso tool. And this works a little bit differently. Here we're going to click, drag, and click repeatedly. We're going to just connect straight line segments. So if I click here and then drag, and click again, you can see that I'm just creating straight line segments. In this case, around the gentleman in this image. They're all straight lines, and we're just setting anchor points in between them. So I can simply click repeatedly. I'm just making a very rough outline of his shape. When you're ready to close the selection, and with this tool you have to do it manually, you can see that my cursor now has a circle beneath it. Once you see that circle, you know that your next click will complete the selection. Now I have a selection, and again, we can move this selection or we can cut out the object. The final lasso tool that I'm going to talk about is the magnetic lasso tool, and this tool is very interesting. I'm going to zoom in here on the image onto this subway sign. The magnetic lasso tool is great because it allows us to trace over shapes and automatically snap along edges. I'm going to cut out this U in the Union Square sign. So with the magnetic lasso tool selected, I'm going to simply click and then start dragging. Points are automatically added, and it's following the outline of this letter. This tool works great in areas of high contrast, and obviously black and white have about the highest contrast you can get. So all I'm really doing is tracing along the edge of this letter. And there's my hollow circle that lets me know that I can complete the selection. Now, it's not perfect, but I can move the mouse in here, Command click on the Mac, Control click on the PC, and I've made a very rough cutout of that U shape. One of the issues that new users have when they first try the magnetic lasso tool is they trace around an object and they get a very rough result that's a little sloppy, kind of like what we just saw. And then they give up on the tool and say, oh, it doesn't work. But if we go up here to the options bar, there are settings that can help us get a better result. First, I'm going to undo what we just did, Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on the PC. Up here in the options bar, we have a setting for width. That tells the tool how far out from the edge it should look. That's fine at 10 pixels. Contrast determines the amount of difference in contrast between what's going to be selected and what isn't. And that's what we're going to change here. 10% is a little low. We'll change this to maybe 40% and see what that does. Frequency just tells the tool how often it should place the anchor points. I think we're fine at 11. So with that new setting, let's go down and try that U again. I'm going to deselect with Command D on the Mac, Control D on the PC. And now let's see what we have. We'll start here tracing around the edge. We're moving up. Much nicer result. We didn't get that little spillover. And there's our hollow selection. So we'll close it up. And a much better and tighter selection. So now if I cut this out, you can see a big difference. So when you're going to use the magnetic lasso tool, spend a couple of minutes experimenting with those width, contrast, and frequency settings, and you can get really great results with very little effort. For our next lesson, we're going to open up a separate image. So for now, you can simply close this without saving. The Quick Selection tool is a giant leap forward in making selections of real-life objects. In fact, it's downright awesome. Let's open up an image. We'll go back to our Chapter 4 folder, and this time we'll open up the image titled Quick Select. I'm going to hit F to go into full screen mode. I'm going to do Fit to Screen with Command 0 on the Mac, Control 0 on the PC, just to get the image size a little bigger. And we're going to go to our Tools panel and locate the Quick Selection tool. It's this brush with the little selection spilling around it. The shortcut for that tool is the letter W. Now I've got a brush size selected, but it is very small. You can see that as my cursor is over the screen, basically I just see 4 points. If I go up to the options bar and click on the brush size options, I can drag the size. Here it's at 15. I can make it much larger. Now that's one way to change the brush size. Here you can see I've got a bigger brush, but it's still too small. What I'm going to recommend is a shortcut to change the size of the brush. On your keyboard you have left and right bracket keys. If you press the right bracket key repeatedly, you continuously increase the brush size. If you press the left bracket key, you reduce the size of the brush. The beauty of this method is that you can actually see the size of the brush as you're adjusting it. Also in the options panel, I want you to make sure that you have this auto enhance box checked. Over here to the left, we have 3 painting modes, and we want to be on this middle mode, which is the add mode. Now what I want to do in this image is select the background and leave the subject alone. With the Quick Selection tool, all you have to do is start painting. I'm going to simply paint over this background area starting on the sky, and look at that. Already it selected the sky and left our subject virtually untouched. I'm going to come down here to finish. Now notice that as I drag down to the left, it has spilled over and captured some of our subject's arm. And this is the beauty of the Quick Select tool. Right now my circle has a plus in it. That means we're in the add mode. I'm going to reduce the brush size a bit. And if I hold down the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on the PC, that plus changes to a minus. This is going to subtract from our selection. So now I just paint over the area that was included by mistake. And now I'm going to continue painting in my add mode. I'll come down here on the right side of his body. And I'm going to zoom in to make sure I get this area as well. My brush size is much too big for that. And again, I'm reducing the brush size by repeatedly pressing the left bracket key. This is a much better size here. I'm going to come in. And because I've got auto enhance on, as I let go of the mouse, Photoshop does its best to try to make my selection even more precise. That looks pretty good. I'll try to get this one little spot up here in the top. That's not bad. I've got a little bit of spill over here on the edge, so I'm going to go into my subtract mode with the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on the PC. And that looks pretty good. One last area down in the bottom that I want to get to. I'll paint in here with a little bit bigger brush size. And finally, this last area of green. But I'll take out some of this. I think this is part of the chair he's sitting on. Looks pretty good. Now we've got a selection of the background and we're leaving the foreground alone. Well, what can we do with this selection? Well, one thing we can do is use an adjustment on this. We talked about levels and curves. Let's go up to the image menu, go down to Adjustments, and we'll bring up Levels for this example. Now, because I have selected an area, in this case the background, any adjustment tool that I use in Photoshop is going to be restricted to that selection. So if I grab this slider in the middle and drag it to the right, you can see that I'm darkening the background significantly, but my subject in the foreground is being left completely alone. The Quick Selection tool is going to quickly become your very best friend when it's time to make complex selections. When we need to make a selection based on the color of objects in an image, we can sit back and let Photoshop do all the hard work. Let's open a file. We'll go to our Chapter 4 folder and this time open the Color Range image. I'm going to press the F key to take us into full screen mode with menu bar. I'm going to invoke the hand tool by pressing and holding the space bar while dragging this over to the left, make room for our dialog box. And we're going to go up to the Select menu and choose Color Range. Now what we want to do in this image is select these tulips, but we don't want to select the stems. We just want to select these red tulip heads. In the Color Range dialog box, we have 3 eyedroppers. This first eyedropper is what we're going to use to actually make our color selection. So with this eyedropper selected, we simply move over the image and I'm going to click on a color area that I'm looking to isolate. Now, in the preview window of the Color Range dialog box, you can see some of the image has turned to white. The areas that are white are the areas that have been selected. So we've started to select some of these tulips, but we need to make our selection broader. To do that, we're going to click on this second icon, the eyedropper with the plus sign. This is our Add Eyedropper, and what I'm going to do is click on a color that has not been included in our selection. There we go. You can see that much more of the tulips are now white. There's a few more spots here that I'm going to go in and clean up. Get this down here. That's looking pretty good. Maybe one more click there. That looks great. Now you can see in our preview that all of those tulips have been selected. There's a fuzziness slider at the top of the Color Range dialog box that you can use to expand or contract your selection. If you drag it to the left, it will contract your selection, making it more precise. If you drag it to the right, it will expand it and include more colors. Right now, I think we're pretty good at 78, so I'm just going to press the Return key to invoke the OK button. And now we have a selection of these tulips. You can imagine how long it would have taken if we had to either drag these with the polygon tool or even draw with the Quick Selection tool. Not as fast as just going to the Color Range tool. What can we do with this selection? Well, last time we did a levels adjustment. Now let's do a hue saturation move. I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and choose Hue Saturation. Now, we can move the hue slider and it will affect only the areas of the image that have been selected. So if I drag it to the left, for example, you can watch the tulips and they change in color. If I drag it to the right, they also change in the color, get a little bit warmer. Now with these marching ants around our selections, it can be a little difficult to see exactly what's going on. So we're going to go up to the View menu, and under Extras, we're simply going to click it to turn off those selection borders. We're not deleting them, we're just turning them off so that we can have a better visual sense of what we're changing. So let's try that hue slider again. As I drag it to the left, you can see we're changing the color, going more towards the purple. Back to the right, we're getting a little more orange. So it's pretty amazing. Just with one trip to the Color Range dialog box, we now have a fairly fine-tuned selection of the image. I'm going to press the Return key to hit OK. Now, I'll go back up to the View menu so we can turn back on our edges, so we can see our selection. Now, this only took a few seconds to make this selection, but there are times when you're going to really be laboring over an image for a considerable amount of time, and if I saved and closed this image, that selection is gone forever. But I'm going to show you how to save a selection. With this selection active, we're going to go over to our Channels tab. And at the bottom of the Channels tab, we're going to click on this second icon that is our Load Selection as Channel button. Once we do that, we've now created an alpha channel. An alpha channel is just a fancy word for a selection that's contained in the Channels panel. With the alpha channel added, we can save and close this file and open it back up 3 years from now and very quickly get back to this exact selection. Let's see how that works. I'm going to deselect this selection right now with Command D on the Mac, Control D on the PC. Our selection is now gone and seemingly lost forever. But if we go back to our channels palette, select the alpha channel by clicking it so it is highlighted in blue, and this first icon at the bottom, the Load Channel as Selection button, we're going to press that. Now we're going to click back on our RGB channel, and voila, we have our original selection. How do we know it's the original selection? Well, let's try it out. Let's make another adjustment to the image. We'll go up to Image, Adjustments, and this time we'll do Levels. So we have a selection of all of our tulips, and if I drag to the left, I can brighten them while leaving the rest of the image untouched. So if you need to select something based on color, the Color Range tool is a great place to start, and we can save selections. This selection is saved as an alpha channel. It'll stay with our image unless we manually throw it away.